Brent Pope, a New Zealander based for so many years here in Ireland, to give us his Tri-Nation selection. This is a rugby team made up of players from Australia, South Africa and New Zealand for the last 20 years, from 2000 to 2020. Now, each position, Brent will have a choice of a player from one of those representing countries, from Australia, New Zealand and South Africa. So before we start, Brent, in relation to, we'll start with your forwards. I just want to run down some of the players. This was a very tough, difficult list to pick from, and obviously some great players have been omitted from this list. So just to run down some of the names here that probably would get onto any team in world rugby if it was in any given year, but we're talking about 20 years here, and we only could pick one player from that nation for each position. So some of the names here: Manu Nonu, New Zealand; James O'Connor, Australia; Justin Marshall, New Zealand; Andrew Mertens, New Zealand; Conrad Smith, New Zealand; Matt Burke, Australia; Quade Cooper, Australia; JP Peterson, South Africa; Carlos Spencer, New Zealand; Dougie Howlett, New Zealand; Mills Muliaina, New Zealand; Wendell Saylor, Australia; Dwayne Vermaelen, South Africa; Dean de Villiers, South Africa; Runan Pinar, South Africa; Joe Rotakoko, New Zealand; Adam Ashley Cooper, Australia; Bernard Foley, Australia; Schalke Burger, South Africa; Brayton Palsy, South Africa; Brad Thorne, New Zealand; Jerry Collins, New Zealand; Joe Roth, Australia. I suppose, Brent, if you were given that list and you were out and you had to pick a team out of that list, I'd say you'd be very confident of winning not only the Rugby World Cup, but everything that there was in terms of World Rugby.
Yeah, well, I watched George's prolificating on his the other day, and I thought, geez, you could pick three teams that can wallop his side, his all-time Lion side for the last 20 years. You're right. I mean, you look at other players like sort of, you know, Retallick and Oz Durant and Bowden Barrett playing. We've given them a different position, but yeah, look, I mean, you know, there's some fantastic players there that would grace any world side. For instance, you know, Dougie Howlett, Conrad Smith. You know, Conrad Smith-Nonu combination in the midfield is as good as any in the history of rugby. But look, they're not in the selections you've given me, so we're only going to discuss the ones you've given me the option. I think it's a pretty good, actually, I think you've come up with a pretty good list that sort of covers the strengths of each particular country at a particular time. Obviously, for me, it's dominated by more New Zealanders than the others, but the others get a sprinkling of players in, and justifiably.
Yeah, and I suppose one player that I have to mention now, he retired in 2000, an all-time great, but we are talking the last 20 years, and we have included players from 2001 onwards. Some players here have retired in 2001, so they were included. But Tim Horan retired in 2000, an all-time great for Australia. If he had played another 2 years, I'd say an automatic shoe-in on any team, and probably an automatic shoe-in for you as well, I imagine, Brent.
Yeah, well, that combination, a bit like Manu Nonu and Conrad Smith, that combination of Timmy Horan and Little for Australia was as good as I think they've ever got in the midfield. You know, Australian rugby has slipped a bit over the years. Yes, they've been capable of some great performances in World Cup years, especially in big matches. But to have a backline that consisted of those guys, Campese at the time, was world class. And I don't think they've ever come back to that kind of state of the game in Australia, but certainly Horan and Little were a fantastic combination for Australia. And you know, Horan very much the game-breaking player, great passer, strong runner. You know, good intelligent rugby player. But yes, he would have graced any World 15 at that stage. So unfortunately, he doesn't make ours because he retired. So he shouldn't have retired. I think this would have been a huge feather in his cap to make this side that we're selecting today. So I'm sure he regrets retiring.
And I suppose, Brent, you've seen George Hook's selection. I suppose the biggest bombshell, the reaction we've got so far is the fly half position.
Oh, yeah.
Going for Gregor Townsend.
Are you kidding me? Townsend. He wouldn't tackle a cold, that guy. You know. And look, I see George's point that he kept having to reiterate, you know, we're picking a team to play. But I mean, that's not necessarily the way that I've looked at it. I'm picking a team that's going to win this match and just dominate up front. So it's no good having all these players that can play ball when they don't get the damn ball. Yeah. So I think that, yes, Gregor Townsend was a mercurial type of player. He could be brilliant on one day in that sort of running game. He wasn't a particularly great kicker of the ball. I know George made, not excuses for that, but he wouldn't have made mine. Great player and a great coach now, obviously, but he wouldn't have been my choice. It would have been a straight shootout. I think Johnny Wilkinson would have been obviously involved, and maybe Johnny Sexton and that, but certainly Townsend wouldn't have been.
And I suppose, Brent, we'll wait to see if there's any sort of bombshells in your selection. We'll bring you on now. We'll get proceedings rolling. We'll start with the forwards and we'll start with the props. And I suppose we'll start with the first position here. We have the candidates BJ Botha for South Africa, Sekope Kefu Australia, and Ben Franks New Zealand. And you might explain your selection here and your reasons why, and if that person went down with an injury, who would be the backup in this position?
Well, I think I've got to go with Franks, not just because I'm a New Zealander, because that'll come through the selection, because I think you've got to, if you're going to beat this Lions team that George is saying, all singing and dancing team, you've got to start with a core of forwards, of tight forwards that can, I suppose, demolish the Lions selection. So I think Franks, world-class scrummager, good around the field, a couple of World Cups titles under his belt. Yeah, it was a close. Here's the problem with picking Australians in the front row. Australia, by their nature, what people don't realise here is they've never really produced world-class scrummagers. Why? Because it's not in their nature to play the game that way. They grew up in Australia playing either rugby league or something, which is not scrum orientated, as you know, or they play American Aussie rules like the GAA here. So yeah. Scrummaging wasn't really part of the game. In fact, until in Argentina Topo Rodriguez ended up playing for Australia, was probably the first time that they'd really taken a closer look at scrummaging. So the Australians, while they're great around the paddock, they sometimes let themselves down in the basics of the game as far as the scrumming is concerned. So it would be a toss-up between obviously Franks and then BJ Botha, but I'd throw another name in there just on the outside. I'd throw in, say, someone like Oz Durant. I know he didn't make it, but BJ Botha, again, slightly smaller as far as the props are concerned, but a great ball player and a good scrummager. So it would be Franks first, and then for me Botha, because I think you've got to have a good front row in the basics of the game. But let's forget about the ball playing just at the moment. Let's get our tight five winning this ball and dominating the scrum. So
I suppose, Brent, before we move on to the hooker position, one thing that we forgot to mention, that this is from 2000 to 2020, and Argentina joined the Tri-Nations in 2012. Yeah. So that's why they have been omitted, because they've only been there for the last 8 years. But when you talk about front rows in Argentina, I'm sure if some of those boys were available, they would be serious options for you.
Yes, I toured Argentina on a number of occasions, and going back in the day, they used to spend, they really invented scrummaging as we know it now. They used to spend hours on the scrum machine, going back to the days of Diego Cash, and these guys were the best scrummagers in the world. And they still are dominant in that, especially if you play them at home in Argentina, they still dominate. So yes, a certain number of them would have made that front row, if you were just looking at the scrummaging. But yeah. But then, look, they're not included, so they'll have to miss out. But so look, we'll go with Franks.
Yeah. We'll move on to hooker now.
Selection.
Yeah. But we'll move on to the hooker position now, Brent. And the three options here, we have John Smith from South Africa, Kevin Mealumu for New Zealand, and Stephen Moore from Australia. And when you look at this selection, there's an awful lot of World Cups here.
Yeah, an awful lot of caps. Yeah. More over 100 games for Australia. Smith, obviously, World Cup winning captain, and you've got Mealumu, 135, 138 times for New Zealand. This was a tough one again. Now, this is not anti-Australia. Moore's a good player, but I think he drops out for the other two. I think Smith, could have reason to be selected because of his leadership abilities. Also remember that he played prop a lot of the time, so he brings that scrummaging ability. But I think for all-round game, then it's probably Mealumu because I think that he was a great thrower to the line out. He was very mobile. He was a kind of a new breed of hooker where they were slightly smaller. Even saying that, he was still 115 kgs, but he was slightly smaller, more mobile, and, you know, playing over 100 games or something like that. But that was a close one, because Smit was it remains a great leader of men and a great captain. But I think when you just put it down to the duties of what you want your hooker to do, which is throw the ball into line out, scrum well and get around the park, I think that Mealumu gives you those three options. More in the mobile sort of hooking range in recent years, and as a latter player, obviously in the more modern times. I just don't know that if his scrummaging was tested enough to put him ahead of the other two. So I'm going to go with Mealumu.
And we'll move on to the other choice in the front row, the other prop, and we have James Slipper for Australia. Then we have the Beast himself, Tendai Mtawarira from South Africa, and Tony Woodcock from New Zealand. Yeah,
well, the Beast goes in there for me, but given not only for what he's brought to South African rugby, but for world rugby, you know, played over 100 times for South Africa, has become probably, after Lomu, kind of iconic in the game as a sort of a world superstar. You know, even the call, the Beast, goes out all around the world. Had a smashing last World Cup, despite people thinking that he was too old and that he wasn't such a great scrummager. The only slight criticism would come in his ability to scrum, and maybe scrum up against a guy like Woodcock or maybe Carl Heyman or something before them, who were probably the forerunners to the big tight heads, you know. But I think, look, just purely on emotion and purely for the fact that people won't want to hear another New Zealander in the front row, I'm going to go with the Beast. I think he deserves it. Again, I think Woodcock, you know, in any other team, if Franks wasn't on the other side, you'd go with Woodcock, because Woodcock is world class. I mean, you know, he's been known for the last 6 or 7 years as probably the best scrummaging tight head in the world. So, yeah, but I think the Beast all round play and what he's meant to world rugby, and, you know, what he'd give you on a match day as far as the crowd getting involved. So we'll put him in. The South Africans will be pleased.
And I suppose, Brent, before we move on now to the second rowers, just in relation to the Beast himself, South Africa won the recent World Cup, and Kolisi was the inspirational leader and the guy on the pitch, but a man of the experience of the Beast himself, and he probably did an awful lot, I presume, the leadership qualities away from the camera in the dressing room as well.
Absolutely. I mean, all the players talk about that, and when he came in, of course, he's the first black South African player to reach 100 caps, and he sort of paved the way for those players to be accepted within the South African ranks. And I mean, he's comes across, everything I've seen about him is he's a polished guy, he's a class guy, he's very much a team man, very humble guy. Yes, absolutely, they tapped into his experience, and that's what I'd be looking for when I'm coaching the side, is to bring that experience to bear against Georgia's side. You know, when you've been around the block that many times, you know, over 100 caps for your country, especially a country like South Africa, then you bring all that wealth of experience to the front row. So I think, he's a good choice.
And I suppose when I bring you on to the two positions down the locks, just in relation to Georgia's team, you're up against stiff competition here. Alan Wyn Jones and Paul O'Connell, two great players on Georgia's side. But here's your first option now. You have Victor Mayfield, South Africa, Nathan Sharpe, Australia, and Ali Williams, New Zealand.
Matfield, every day of the week. Matfield's world class. Look what he done at the World Cups, you know, player of the match or something in the final against England. I mean, great around the park. He's just about an extra loose forward. He's rugged. He's tough. He's a great line-out. There's probably on opposition ball, he probably was the best steal of balls, up there with Alan Wyn Jones as a steal of opposition ball. So I think they go kind of head-to-head well. I think that there's not much in it. Alan Wyn Jones, have a huge amount of respect for him and what he's done for Welsh rugby, and the fact that he's like Matfield. He's a tough hombre. But I think Matfield, Alan Wyn Jones, I can't select, nor can I select O'Connell, who both be on my side. But Matfield will be able to put it up to them. Yeah. I think Matfield, above the other two, clearly above the other two, in my opinion.
I suppose the other position then for your lock, you have an Australia World Cup reigning captain here in John Eales. Bakkies Botha from South Africa and Sam Whitelock from New Zealand.
Well, this was probably along with the scrum halves, probably the toughest decision I had to try to make, because when we're looking at the dates, we've got to go on reputation, and if it's on reputation, then John Eales gets it, because he was just such a fantastic athlete, and a bit like the Beast, iconic to Australian rugby, and one of the true greats of the game, both on and off the field. But if you're looking about what you want to, is Matfield and Botha up against O'Connell and Wyn Jones would be mouthwatering. I mean, Botha's the kind of O'Connell-esque type of player that George picked. You know, he's the enforcer. He's the guy that gets down and dirty. Eales is the more athletic, and so is Whitelock. Whitelock is more in the Eales mould, in the sense that he's more angular. He's kind of tall and slighter. Botha's just a big beast of a man that, you know, crashes about, moves rucks and everything like that. But I think just on sentiment and emotion, I played against John Eales. I saw him play. Fantastic leader again, that experience. He can also goal kick if he has to. Yeah. So I'm going to go, and the fact that, you know, we've got to get some Aussies in there. Not just saying it for people to be merit, but there's not much between those three. But I'm going to go with Eales in there, and I'm going to have Botha off the bench to come in and do a bit of damage. So I'm going with John Eales. So my midfield, my second row is going to be Victor Matfield and John Eales. I think that's a pretty good balance of power and athleticism.
And I suppose we'll move on to the flankers position now, and it really gets some mouth-watering names here. Some real top, currently in World Rugby and previously in World Rugby. And the first selection, Michael Hooper, Australia, Richie McCaw, New Zealand, and Siya Kolisi, South Africa. How did you pick between these three? I imagine it must have taken hours.
No, that was an easy one. I'm not being arrogant here. I don't believe there's been a better rugby player than Richie McCaw. I believe that there's been more players who we'll talk about that have been, you know, like Lomu, that have changed the game. But I believe that Richie McCaw, you know, yes, I'm prepared to take criticism. People say cheating and that and all that, you know, that's fine. That's their opinion. But I'll go out on the limb and say, at this stage, Richie McCaw is the greatest player that I've seen play the game. It's as simple as that. You know, you don't become the leading game playing captain with 2 World Cups and numerous World Players of the Year for a reason. And you certainly don't get there by people saying you're cheating. What people don't realise is, when I talk to people back in New Zealand about Richie McCaw, they would say that he would regularly do the referees' exams and score a lot more than the referees. So he just knew the rules. So when people said, he's offside or whatever, no, what he'd often do is go back to the referee and say, under the new laws, B phrase C, I can come in the back door or something if I'm, you know, like, he was just such the consummate professional, cool as ice, just a phenomenal rugby player. Yeah. So McCaw, Hooper is the new breed. He's a fantastic, and he would make any other team, by the way. Hooper, you know, fantastic on the ground, in that sort of game that Australia play when it's loose with him and Pocock. He's just a wee bit off Richie McCaw, I think, and I think most people would go with that. You know, most people would look at McCaw and say, yeah, if he's not the best rugby player that's played, he's up there in the top 3 or 4 anyway. So he gets that spot. I think Kolisi, you know, he's going to be great, but I think it's just a bit early to judge him. So he would be number 3 in that list, even though he's an inspirational captain and, you know, he's done for the country marvellous things, as we know, in the World Cup. And it wasn't a finer example of a player that really brought the whole nation together, a bit like Francois Pienaar before him. But I think that he's got a way to go before he starts lacing up McCaw and Hooper's boots at this stage.
I suppose we'll move on to the other flanker position. And again, some of the names here. Jerome Kano, New Zealand. David Pocock, Australia. And Francois Lowe, South Africa. And I suppose for me, Brent, in relation to seeing that, I couldn't get away from Jerome Kano no matter how much I looked at it. But have you a different opinion here?
Yeah, I'm putting Jerome number 2. For me, Pocock. is my number 6. I just think McCaw and Pocock working together. We're looking at a team like George was. Those guys on the ground. You couldn't get two more better exponents at turning the ball over. Jerome Kino possibly has a wider range of a game than David Pocock in the sense that he's more of a running ball playing number 6 out in the wider channels. But man, around the fringes of the ruck and that Pocock's upper body strength, aligned with McCaw playing that kind of left and right flanker role that they could play like he does with Hooper, I think they'd be phenomenal. I mean, you couldn't get, I don't think on paper, anywhere in the last 10 years or 15 years, anywhere in world rugby, and that's even going against George's Lions selection, because I think that if you went into a game with McCaw and Pocock, you couldn't get two better players. I don't think you could replace those guys with anything from the Northern Hemisphere. I'd have to say, you know, Pocock and McCaw working in tandem together, stealing every ruck ball, you know, their professionalism, their strength around their, you know, phenomenal loose forward duo.
And I suppose, Brent, we'll bring you on to the number 8, and your number 8 is going to be up against Lawrence Delalio, a great player for England. And your options here, you have Kieran Reid, a World Cup winner, New Zealand, Bobby Skinstad, South Africa, and Totus Kefu of Australia.
Well, Bobby Skinstad drops out of that race for me, so it's probably Kieran Reid. I think overall skills-wise, you know, range in the line out, a good ball player, working in tandem with the other two guys doing the mop-up work. It gives him a bit of a more free-range ability like Parise and Harden Order-Key to sort of play in the outside channels. That's where Reid is at his best. He's not a Vermilion, Buck Shelford type of number 8. He's not a Lawrence Delalio type of number 8. Kieran Reid's best parts of his game was a skill set. Great hands, great speed, a great rugby brain. So put that rugby brain alongside sort of Pocock's power and McCaw as well. You've probably got a pretty good loose forward trio. I must admit, I looked at the strengths of the others in the sense that I possibly wanted a bigger ball carrier than Reid in a sense to get over the gain line, but you're not going to get that from Bobby Skinstad. Now, Bobby Skinstad was a very skillful player, but he doesn't bring the skill game that Reid would bring, and he doesn't bring the power game that Kefu would bring. So he drops out. That's not saying a thing. He's an exalted company, but so it's whether you go for Reid's all-round game or you go with Tendai Kefu's power and ability to throw a few punches, as Trevor Brennan would tell you.
And I suppose, Brent, that concludes your forwards. We'll just recap on them. So, in your props, you've nominated, your first prop is Ben Franks. Your hooker, you've gone for Kevin Mealumu of New Zealand. And your other prop, you've gone for the beast, Tendai Mtawarira. Your first lock is Victor Matfield from South Africa. Your second lock is John Eales from Australia. Your first flanker is Richie McCaw from New Zealand. Your second flanker is David Pocock. And your number 8 then is Kieran Reid. I suppose we're going to link you on to your backs now. And when we're compiling the position for scrum-half, and we're looking at some of the names.
This was the toughest. Look at the players that you left. You know, Will Guinea, Justin Marshall. Look, this was the hardest decision I made. So you go through the options, and I'll tell you who I selected.
Brent, I suppose in terms of that, these are the 3 of probably the all-time greats of world rugby that we have in here now. We have a current great, and we have 2 all-time legends for their country as well. So I imagine that everyone will have a different opinion on this. Everyone, and this is an opinionated thing. They all bring different aspects to the games, but I'm just going to go through the names here. And the first name, Lord Mercy in his soul, Juice van der Westhuizen from South Africa. The second option, George Gregan from Australia, and then we've Aaron Smith from New Zealand. And you're talking about history books. We have 2 guys definitely in the history books of world rugby in the first 2 names, and then Aaron Smith, who probably will go into the history books as well. So whatever option you pick here, I think you'd fancy your chances of getting the better of George in his selection of Rob Howley.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think whatever one. Now, I went back and forward, and you're probably going to not be surprised at the two I went back and forward with it. And unfortunately, Smith misses out, in my opinion, at the moment. World class, yes, and he's he's going to be. But I think you've got two legends of the game to contend with. So you're either going with power with Van der Westhuizen and ability to snipe and break like no other scrum half, I believe, certainly over the last 20 years, or you're going for someone like Gregan, who was a smart scrum half and could sort of nut out gaps and read the game so marvellously well. Aaron Smith has both those qualities, but we're taking the top qualities from those players. So I had Gregan in, but then at the last moment, I'm going to juice Van der Westhuizen. I just think at 6'2", 6'3", he was a sort of hallmark of the sort of the new scrum halves that are a lot bigger in the position. He was like another loose forward, and you get him working in that triumphant with Pocock and McCaw and Reed. His ability to snipe, certainly his ability to snipe around and keep the opposition back row, Delalio and these guys guessing would be key. Gregan's more of a kind of a player that would possibly play slightly wider than Van der Westhuizen, and possibly has the superior pass. But I just think that Van der Westhuizen's power and his ability to get over the gain line, close into the rucks, and his kicking game, which was excellent, then he gets the nod. But only just. I think Gregan was a fantastic ambassador for Australian rugby, and any other side could just as easily make it. And Aaron Smith, he's going to be one of the greats, but I just had to go with where my heart lies.
And I suppose, Brent, before we move on to the fly half, and I suppose the key link between scrum half and fly half is critical in any team. It's the winning of the games. And just in terms of the three players we picked for the scrum half, do you believe that they are the three best possible candidates representing their countries?
I think so. I think that list is spot on. As I think with the loose forwards, I think that. Yes, what surprised me in a certain position, because I suddenly thought, okay, you've got 5, 6, or 7 of those could be in the mix. Whereas the position I was probably slightly disappointed when I looked up myself was the number 8 position, because I thought, where's the Zinzan book of that area? Where's the Buck Shelf? Where's even the Rocky Olsen if he played at 8? Where's that grunt machine that the Northern Hemisphere could probably bring? Be it Delalio, they could have bought a number of players, Munapola and these types of guys. You could even go back to Dean Richards if you wanted that kind of big mullocky number 8. So New Zealand and South Africa didn't try that. But I mean, scrum half, yeah, I think that's a fair estimation. I think there could be argument in New Zealand as to who, over the last 20 years, has been the best scrum half. Was it Justin Marshall or was it Aaron Smith? I think Aaron Smith probably gets that nod. But I think there'd be no doubt if you asked anybody in Australian rugby over the last 20 years or South African rugby, who their scrum halves would be. It would be, earlier than that, it would be obviously Nick Farr-Jones, but then it would be definitely George Gregan and then Will Guinea close and behind. But for South Africa, it would be Van der Westhuizen all day long. So he gets it. And
we're supposed to move on to the fly half position now, and the 3 nominees. And 2 of the nominees here, Dan Carter, New Zealand, and Andre Pollard, South Africa, World Cup winners. The option of Steve Larkham, I was dicing this between Quade Cooper and Steve Larkham. I'm a big Quade Cooper.
No. You went right, Larkham. Larkham was a fantastic and often underrated player. I mean, the thing about Stephen Larkham was, I remember being said to me years ago, it looked like he wasn't moving fast. He had that kind of languid style that he sort of casually looked like he could crack open a can of beer as he was running and have a chat and still make gaps. He was a fantastic player. He was a running out half. So if we're going to go with George's philosophy, then I would select him, because you'd look at his ability to counter-attack and play off the cuff game. But I'm not going down George's line that he went with Gregor Townsend. And I'm going with the player that was easy for me to select, which was Dan Carter. I think Pollard, everybody, even South African supporters would say Pollard is not at Carter's level yet. He's not at Larkham's level. Dan Carter, as proved in the Lions on the last tours out there, can win a game. I mean, he's still arguably New Zealand's greatest out half. I mean, there'd be arguments now because Bowden Barrett is more recent. But as far as Dan Carter being able to control every aspect of the game, now I mean every aspect. He's brave in defence. He's a good line breaker. He's a fabulous goal kicker. He's a fabulous tactical kicker. What you get with Dan Carter is just about the complete out half. He's cool under pressure. They say he's not scared to go in and make the tackles. So, yeah, I think that Larkin brings that kind of, again, that sort of David Campese sort of laissez-faire style that, you know, give him the ball from anywhere and he's going to go through that gap as we see him. But I don't think if the game got mucky and dirty and it started raining, I don't think he's the man to pin the Lions back into the corner and give George's side a miserable time. But I think Dan Carter's the guy to do that. Dan Carter reads the game so well. And with him, with Van der Vestes and pulling the strings there, you've got a fantastic combination of players. Wow. You know, exactly. Wow. The strength of Van der Vestes and breaking round, then Carter moving on to the ball with his ability to pass off both hands equally well, bringing the power runners in out wide. You know, fantastic. You couldn't get a better combination than that.
I suppose we move on to the wing, and the two guys here that are really two really strong candidates. I sort of felt sorry for them in one sense because they're great players, but they're up against a rugby icon. So in fairness to these two guys, if it was a debate between the two of them on their own, it'd be some debate between Drew Mitchell and Cheslin Kobe. But they're up against Jonah Lomo, unfortunately for them. So in fairness, I know what you're going to pick here. I say it's fairly obvious.
Everybody would.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is John Alomu couldn't tackle Cheslin Colby. He wouldn't have the ability to tackle him because Cheslin Colby would be through his legs, round his legs before he knew it. But here's something I'm going to say. My player of all time is John Alomu. So you know, people talk, and I talked about McCaw, but for a different reason. I still think McCaw is if you look at the all-round, the skill set, then he's the complete player. John Alomu wasn't the complete player. We knew about his defensive deficiencies. We knew that he struggled to go back. His kicking game wasn't fantastic. But he was the one player in the history of the game to date that changed the face of rugby. Teams started to try to select big guys that match them, and they still haven't matched his power. You know, so many years on, 20 years on or so, they still haven't been able to come up with players. They've come up with players that have been equally big in size, you know, in a sense of a lot of these Fijian players and the players of the modern game, you know, even these players that they've tried to bring into the English squads, these guys that are the same sort of size that Lomu was. But you've got to go back 20 years to just see him. I remember coming back in a flight. I knew Zinzan Brookwell. I played a lot of times with Zinni, and he's a friend. I was coming back when they were over in the World Cup in '99 or whatever. Yeah. I remember saying to Zinzan, I said, "Look, how big is John Alomu really? You know, I'd sort of seen him about, but he said, well, have a look. He's coming down the aisle of the plane. Wow." I never saw an athlete that big. Now he ballooned for the Kentucky Fried Chicken to about 22 stone, but it was all on his thighs and his leg. He wore the biggest shorts of that World Cup. Yeah. The biggest shorts they had to get him. He was massive, and to be able to run the 100 meters in a time that would have qualified you for the Commonwealth Games or whatever, or would have won a New Zealand title, to move that quick and to have that much strength and that power. It's no wonder that the Dallas Cowboys and that were looking at him. Like, he was just a phenomenal athlete. John Alomu, most other players can be stopped. John Alomu in his pomp couldn't be stopped. He would take 4 or 5 to. How's George going to stop Jonah coming off Van der Vestes or Dan Carter at full speed? Who's he got in mind to tackle him?
Well, he's two wings of Chris Patterson and Shane Williams, so I don't think Chris Patterson or Shane Williams are going to stop Jonah Alomu.
Patterson and Shane Williams, great players that they are, he would put them in the pocket and carry them around under the post on their shoulders. So George, it's might as well bring back Mike Catt to try to tackle him. But no, Lomu, you know, and Cheslin Colby, I mean, he's world class. I mean, performance in the last World Cup, and fantastic player from what I've seen in you know, in French domestic game, and just great feet. He's like Shane Williams and that sort of player, and you know, but again, you know, it's it's, you know, I don't think you even had to put that to me. I could have said that. So Lomu goes in, yeah.
I suppose one player you haven't mentioned there, I suppose, Drew Mitchell. He was on for
Mitchell.
years. He was the golden boy of Australian rugby. The sort of a nation carried the hopes of a nation on his back. Drew Mitchell was the sort of Merlin in terms of the backs for Australia. If things would happen, it would happen to Drew. It would happen through the eyes of Drew Mitchell. But for some way, it never happened for him in terms of the world stage.
You're right. It didn't happen on the world stage, and that's why, you know, no disrespect to Drew Mitchell as a rugby player. You know, he had a fantastic pedigree. I think he probably suffered from the extent that probably, you know, Australian rugby suffered for those 2 years, and that they sense they probably couldn't give him the platform that maybe South Africa, New Zealand gave. You know, like New Zealand could be slightly unforgiving to someone like Jonah because they could say, look, just get the ball to him, and that's all you have to do. Mitchell was probably a more complete player in the way that Colby is a more complete player. But yeah, I think you're quite right in your summation. I just don't think he ever made, you know, will he go down as an Australian sort of superstar? No, probably not in comparison to, say, Campese or someone like that. But, you know, still an excellent player by all means, but probably doesn't quite, you know, he's probably, when you're probably looking at rating, you're probably looking at Lomu 10, Colby 9, Mitchell maybe an 8, you know. Still great player, you know.
I suppose, Brent, we'll bring you on now to the centres here. And for three of the centres, one centre for me, for his country, he went in there straight away with Sterling Marklock. But I had to take a bit of time now to think about the other two options with Tanu Umaga, you have Manu Nonu, Carlos Spencer can play in the centre position as well. Jack Espore for South Africa, a great player, but then you have the likes of Jan de Villiers as well, who didn't make it. But the three options, Tanu Umaga, an all-time legend in New Zealand rugby, Jack Fiore, a World Cup winner twice for South Africa, and Sterling Marklock, probably won a World Cup for Australia.
Yeah. Again, there's probably a bit of bias here. I thought that apart from earning the wrath of the Irish because of his tackle on Drico, but I think Tana Umaga just shades Sterling Mortlock in that three, and with 4-8 slightly back. I think that South African rugby in the centres was based a lot around the selection of big, hard, straight running centres. You know, if you go back over their history of from way back to Dani Gerber and these greats of South African rugby, de Villiers, they were big, tough men that ran straight and hard and got over the game line, because that was the way that South Africa played. They played a power game. I think that Mortlock and Umaga brought something else. I think Umanga's ability, because he played on the wing for a lot of his games, I think Umanga's ability to, I don't know how the difference between him and Mortlock. I think that he just had a slightly better skill set about bringing other players around him into play. I think his ability to break through a tackle and pass. I think Mortlock was a great sort of, was a great guy for sort of making breaks when there didn't seem to be any there. He was a bit like, I suppose, Stephen Larkham. He had that sort of unusual way of running that made him difficult to tackle. He was a tall kind of guy, slightly built than Umaga. Wouldn't be much.
I can see the way you're talking of, Brent, about the debate between Umaga and Mortlock. You're going to and fro. I say if it was one that you could see an argument why someone could pick Mortlock, and you could see an argument why someone could pick Umaga as well. It's that close. Yeah,
it's pretty close. But I think I've got to go with Umaga there. I think that, you know, pretty complete player and aggressive, and it's something you want against the Lions.
I suppose we move on to the next centre position, and the first guy. He's a World Rugby Player of the Year twice. He can play at fly half, he can play at fullback, and he also can play in the centres. And for this team, we felt he had to go somewhere. He has played in the centres before. First option here is Wayden Barrett. Same can be said about Kurtley Beale as well. He's played fullback for Australia. He's played fly half as well, and he's played in the centre position here. And the option in Jesse Creel, I suppose people will look at South Africa's centres, and the people will say Creel probably over the last 20 years is South Africa's best centre.
Yeah. Again, I probably I'm probably going to go against the grain on this one. This will be my Townsend moment, in a sense. I wouldn't have I would rather have Bowden Barrett. I'd rather have Bowden Barrett at 10. Obviously, it'd be a close run thing. I'd still have Carter there. Fantastic player, absolutely brilliant. I could also have him at fullback, but I don't think he shifts the guy that I've selected there. So I think Bowden Barrett at outside centre. No, so it was down then. He drops out of the race. People have been looking to say, how can Bowden Barrett drop out of any race of any team? And they're probably right. But I just don't see him as an outside centre against Georgia's side. So then it comes down to, do I go with power in Creel and a good ball player, or do I go for some player that can do something a little bit different? And I'm actually a great fan of Kurtley Beales. I know he has his up and down games and he's a bit spasmodic, but he's one of those players that can pull something out of the bag.
Magic, yeah.
When you least expect it. And given that I'd have the rigidity of Dan Carter and Tana Umaga to steady the ship should something go wrong, I think that I would actually opt for Kurtley Beale, because I think we've got to have an attacking option in our backline, and I think that Jesse Creel is a bit too similar to Tana Umaga, if you know what I mean. I think you're playing with the two types of players. What I want in there is to spice things up a little bit, and I think that Kurtley Beale can do that. He's got great feet, he's brave, he's good in the tackle, but he can just make something happen from the sort of off-the-cuff play. So I've got to have one player like that, and I think Beale just shades it ahead of Jesse Creel.
I suppose we'll move on to the fullback position, and many people will be wondering why Bowden Barrett wasn't selected at fullback. But if people go back 20 years, there was a New Zealand legend there for the start of the decade for those many years, and people will say if you were around for that time, you'll have witnessed him. Any of the rugby followers and sporters today have unfortunately never got to see him play, but in his pomp, he was some player. Jeff Wilson for New Zealand, with Percy Montgomery, I suppose another World Cup winner for South Africa. People will say it's obvious when you look at fullbacks, Montgomery is the option for South Africa. And Israel Folau picked, I suppose, ahead of Matt Burke. Matt Burke, Australia, a kicking sort of fullback, a point scorer. But Israel Folau, if you want a man to score a try, Folau is your man.
Yeah. Goldie, Jeff Wilson, I knew well. Of course, there was Christian Cullen coming to the end of his career and floating around there as well. But I think, we'd have to say his best days were over. Still, wow. If you ever want to watch complete rugby, go on to see some of the YouTube clips of Christian Cullen when he was playing. He was just one of those players. You can't think he's not going to score from there. He can't score from there. And then a bit like Wilson, he just had that kind of. And like Larkin before, I talked about that way of move, not necessarily fast on a sprint track, but fast on a rugby field. Percy Montgomery, I don't think. He fulfilled a great role for South Africa and was sort of a new breed of fullback for them as well. But I just don't think he brings what I'm looking for. So Folau for me. Great in the air, can counter-attack off anything, pretty safe in most options of the game. I mean, people often look at Folau and said, okay, well, he scored these phenomenal tries and that, but it was like he was playing GAA all his life. The ball used both to pick out the air. Teams were scared of kicking to him, and that's what I want from a fullback. I want a fullback that's not particularly, that's safe. But teams are scared to say, well, look, we're not going to put the ball anywhere near Folau, because he had that ability. Other fullbacks have the ability to catch and kick and get out of safety. But Folau had that ability that if you kicked to him and you got it wrong, then he could open you up. We've seen that numerous times over the years, what he did, when you thought, my God, fantastic in the air from kickoffs, fantastic in the air from restarts, tall guy, solid. Great rugby league skills, great ability like Sonny Bill to get his hands through the tackle and get passes off. A great offloading game. So, yeah, Folau would be my fullback.
And I'm just going to say in relation to if Mills Mulaina or Dougie Howlett or Rocco Coco were thrown into the mix, would any of those three guys usurp Folau?
Dougie Howlett would go. Dougie Howlett would go close only because of his extreme. Anybody will tell you Munster. I mean, just the most professional guy, leading try scorer, nearly leading try scorer for the All Blacks of all time. I preferred him. I'd have to say I preferred him as a finishing winger than a fullback. I just liked. Again, I just like the fact that, yes, I'd have to say Howlett was one of those fullbacks when I'm looking at a player that had such speed that teams would target them to kick away from rather than kick to. There may be some deficiencies I'd have to maybe cover in Folau's ability, a bit like Jonah, to track back and put ball safely into touch. But I think if I'm going to go with a team that's going to win the match, then Folau would be a real danger man. If you're out half, skews one off the side of the boot and it goes down the middle of the park, and you've got players like Folau, Kirtley Beale to counter attack, and then Jonah to pop the ball up to, attacking from 40 or 50 metres. Big men too. Folau's no shrinking violet. He's about 6'4" himself, and he's probably well over 105, 106 kg. So, a big back three, and I'd stay with Folau. Howlett would push him close. Cullen and his pomp, obviously, being any greatest team of all times, but he's not. So Folau gets it for the last 20 years.
I suppose we'll bring you on to your final position, Brent, and I suppose you have a South Africa's probably all-time legend here in Brian Habana. You've probably New Zealand's one of the most dangerous finishers of all time for New Zealand rugby in Christian Cullen in terms of try scoring. Then you have the big man himself, another powerhouse built like Folau for Australia, Lotte Chikiri, a man built like John Olomo, who was very impossible to stop for 20 yards. But you have the magic against Habana, against the power of Chikiri, against the finishing ability of Cullen. Who gets this one?
Well, I'm going for the magic of Habana. I think here's the caution I'm throwing out to George, like I just said before. You kick downfield and you've got Folau, Lomu and Brian Habana bringing the ball back to you. Man, you're going to have to prick a pretty good defensive screen to stop that. What you've got is power. I mean, Brian Habana is just such a fantastic finisher. He's world class. I mean, Christian Cullen, Cullen's better position for me was at fullback, so I don't think he comes into the mix as a winger. Could still play brilliant rugby there, but I think where he came from, and I don't think you can go through Brian Habana. Who do we have on the wing from Australia? Oh, Lotte Chikiri. Yeah, I think a bit like Bobby Skinsids. I think probably Lotte would probably be delighted to be in that selection of that mix-up with Brian Habana and Christian Cullen. I don't think big, powerful man. I don't think I want two Lomu-type players. I've got one in Folau and I've got the other one in Lomu. So what I need is the arch finisher, the arch poacher, who's Habana. I mean, the number of tries he scored from intercepts alone. Great reader of the game, great guy to track back and cover maybe the defensive deficiencies of possibly Folau and Lomu, in the sense that Brian Habana was such a workhorse on the field. The number of times he went back to save the Springboks bacon, dropped down on a ball or something went wrong upfield. Fantastic finisher. So, it's a pretty tasty looking backline, isn't it?
I suppose we'll just run through that backline again, I suppose, Brent. And you have Jus van der Westhuizen at scrum-half for South Africa. You fly-half Dan Carter. Your first wing is John Olomo. Your two centres are Tana Umaga of New Zealand and Kirtley Beale of Australia. Your fullback is Israel Folau, Australia. And your other wing is Christian Habana. And I suppose you're up against a backline in the opposition who have Howley, who have Gregor Townsend, Will Greenwood, Brian O'Driscoll, Chris Patterson, and Shane Williams. And where do you think you would?
Are you for real? Just listen, seriously. Sorry, no disrespect to these players, but you've gone through a list there, and now on the other side you're looking at Van der Westhuizen, Carter, Lomu. Cullen doesn't even make it. Folau. In fact, I'm not going to just say it because I'm over here in Ireland at the moment. I'm in lockdown. The only position I'm going to seed in that back line is I'm going to take Brian O'Driscoll. I'm going to make him an honorary Tri-Nations, and we're going to shift him into Kurtley Beale's spot. And then we've nearly got the complete. You've got to look at that back line and say you're now talking about some of the greatest players that have represented the greatest rugby nations. I mean, how many World Cups? But if you take the World Cups won by New Zealand, Australia and South Africa, as opposed to the World Cups won by the Northern Hemisphere sides. So you've got that. You've also got to take in that these players have all been World Player of the Years at some stage, most of them in that back line. I don't think there's a chance. There's a chance that back line would compare. Now, I'm not taking away from anything great players. I mean, they're all great players for their, but, seriously, Chris Patterson up against Don Olomu, who are you going for?
I know,
you're betting your mortgage on the showdown that Lomu's running the ball up,
I suppose, Brent, we'll recap through your full team, and I'll give you a moment or two to think to yourself who your selection for captain is. So we'll run back through your team. In props, the first prop, you've Ben Franks for New Zealand. Your hooker is Kevin Mealumu for New Zealand. Your other prop then is the beast Tendai Mtawarira for South Africa. Your two locks are Victor Mayfield for South Africa and John Eales, Australia. First of your flankers is Richie McCaw, New Zealand. Your second flanker is David Pocock, Australia. And your number 8 is Kieran Reid. Your scrum half is Just van der Westhuizen from South Africa. Your fly half is Dan Carter, New Zealand. Your first of your wings is John Olomu, New Zealand. Your two centres are Tana Umaga, New Zealand, and Courtney Beale, Australia. Your fullback is Israel Folau, Australia, and your other wing is Brian Habana. All you have to do is, Alan Wyn Jones was the captain for the British Irish Lions. Who is the captain for your team?
Before I get to the captain, are you able to contact these players and say, could they be at training on Tuesday night and bring their own boots?
Yeah, I'd say Brent is organising the training. You have to go find somewhere secret in Ireland to get away from George. He's contacts in all over the place.
Yeah, sorry, Dan. Training Tuesday night, 6:30. Bring your own gear. But as a matter of interest, what was George's I could probably concede some distance up front to the second row. I think, Conlan and Alan Wyn Jones, again, a great partnership. What was his back row? Delalo at 8. Did he have Richard Hill? Who did he have at 6 and 7?
He had Richard Hill, and if memory serves me correct,
not Neil Back or anything, was it?
No, it wasn't Neil Back. I think he had Barkley. I think he had John Barkley. I think so. If that's just coming to the top of my head now, do correct me. I could be standing wrong. I'm just trying to.
Try putting that back row up against McCaw, Reid, and Pocock as well. But look, a wet day in Wellington, the rain lashing in. Gregor Townsend having a brilliant day and dropping and kicking everything. There might be there wouldn't be a chance. The captain's pretty obvious, I suppose. It's Richie McCaw, well respected. It wasn't such an easy decision because Pocock brings a lot of leadership. Van der Westhuizen would bring a lot of leadership. Dan Carter would bring a lot of leadership. But when you're looking at someone that's won a couple of World Cups, that's led their country for so long, that is well respected by all the players in the team. When you bring this team together, this is a barbarians type game. You need someone that everybody looks up to, and I think that any player playing the game looks up to Richie McCaw, and the fact he's a modest type of guy that you bring in or something like that. He doesn't ruffle any feathers. He's not going to be controversial, for what I want him to say, the post-match victory speech. So that's my team, and I'm sure they're delighted with the news that I've selected them. I'm sure that they're jumping for joy, even in lockdown, that they've made the Brent Pope Tri-Nations selection.
And as you mentioned it, that concludes this series in relation to this is Brent Pope's Tri-Nation selection of 2000 to 2020. Brent, a pleasure as always. We wish you and your family and loved ones all safe keepings during this lockdown, and hopefully we can get back to live rugby sooner rather than later.
Yeah. No, thanks very much. It was good. It was good fun, and I'll call up to George and see when he wants to play the game. Actually, wouldn't it be great? You know, I know they're talking about other tours and that. It'd be great to have a one-off match like that. You know, I mean, I know they're trying to. Warren Gatland was trying to organise a one-off match to the Northern and Southern Hemisphere, the rematch of the drawn game, the last match of the last series. But it would be great to see the players come together to decide actually, you know, where the power lay. But look, it's been good fun. Thanks very much. Same to you. Be safe out there, everybody, and we look forward to appearing on your screens when the rugby season starts again. Hopefully, it's not too long.
Cheers, Brent. Take care.